Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to the Big Questions from the Pyramid in Warrington. I'm Nicky Campbell. Now, this is the Christian season of Epiphany, which is all about God revealing himself to us just as the Christ child was revealed to the three wise men. But as the frontiers of science advance faster and faster, less and less is regarded as the work of God. So this morning we are asking just one very big question. Is there any evidence for God? On our front rows we have some extremely distinguished scientists, Bible scholars, writers, men of the cloth, people whose experiences have changed their own minds about God, and they'll be cheered on and challenged by our very lively Warrington audience. Well, at CERN, they're closer to confirming the existence of the Higgs boson, the missing particle that would confirm the Big Bang theory of how the universe came into being. Last month, the Kepler space mission discovered a planet in another galaxy far away where life, but not as we know it, could conceivably exist. It's a rather different story to the one in Genesis. Is there any evidence for God? Dr. Andrew Pinsent, eminent physicist, as we can see, man of the cloth as well. Now, you accept the cosmology, you see the beauty in the cosmology, you accept evolution, how we came to be, and you believe in God.
Yes, indeed. And in fact, it's interesting you mentioned the Big Bang theory. The two most important theories of modern science, one is the Big Bang and the other is genetics. And it's often a surprise to many people they were both invented by men of the cloth. Georges Lemaitre, the inventor of the Big Bang theory, was a Catholic priest from Belgium, and Gregor Mendel, the founder of genetics, was a monk. So clearly they didn't see any intrinsic problem or of a conflict between science and religion. And there's one other thing about this story most people don't know. Both theories were rejected in the Soviet Union, the world's first atheist state, and they were banned for a number of decades. So it's interesting people think there's an intrinsic conflict, but the lesson of history is often rather different.
There is this God of the gaps idea, though, isn't there? We used to think lightning was caused by God and thunder and earthquakes. Now we know it's tectonic plates. Evolution is a good example. We know about speciation and all the many species that we have, and also the plane of the spheres. And you can put that down to God. We now know it was to do with gravity. And yet the problem is, if you ascribe anything to God, once science finds out what did cause it, God is gone.
No, it depends how you think God interacts with the world and your image of God. So I think some people used to think God was like a watchmaker and doing every fine detail. But the image in a lot of mainstream Christianity is much more that God is like a gardener cultivating the world and allowing the world to develop through its own causation and changes. And that idea about how God interacts with the world was very important, in fact, for the origins of modern science.
Eminent scientists, intelligent people who believe in God. Peter Atkins, what are you missing? What are you not getting here?
Well, I think there's a huge amount of evidence for God in the natural world. But it's evidence for lazy...
Steady, not yet. No, I feel there's a but coming.
Yeah, the second part of that remark is that it's evidence for lazy minds. And what we have to look at is the surge that science has made in our understanding of the world. For thousands of years, people lay back and said, oh, God must have done it. And in a sense, that was good, because they were questioning and looking for answers, but they were going down the wrong path. 300 years ago, and it really is only 300 years, and think of the progress we've made in that time. Mankind, to its great credit, stumbled on the scientific method. And all the great questions of existence which were being answered or being probed by religion suddenly became open to the scientific method. And it's quite extraordinary what progress we're making. And not one iota of that progress needs to call upon the concept of God. So God is driven right back into virtually a point, and we don't need him anymore.
What then, Dr. Andrew Pinsent, can only be explained by God?
Well, certainly I reject a God of the gaps, in that case like Peter Atkins. But I think, nevertheless, civilizations that have believed in God have often been very interested in the big questions, in the search for ultimate causes.
And science owes them a debt.
Can I just finish? But of course, in civilizations which have turned to materialism, which have turned to saying there is no God and there's nothing other than the material world, they only measure goods by material things. So a lot of universities now are under attack because they're regarded as doing a lot of useless things. Why aren't they generating stuff for industry or for business and so on? And unless we keep alive an idea that we're searching for things which are immaterial, for the big questions, then we won't actually also make progress in science as well.
But you mentioned the Big Bang, and
Yes.
that's a material happening.
Why aren't you simply saying
David Aaronovitch.
you prefer a society in which people believe in God? You're not actually suggesting there is any evidence for God. If you look at the question in an anthropological way, in other words, you look at the way in which human beings organise themselves, there is a practically universal demand for a causal story, a foundation myth, which differs from place to place and which are usually actually mutually exclusive. They can't all be true because they depend upon their components which are exclusive to themselves. And then also a religious dimension in order to create some form of cultural practices which regulate society. Morality, ethics and so on, which a lot of which predate the organisations of modern states to do that kind of thing for you. In other words, the evidence is that man creates God and continues to create God.
Charles Foster. Morality comes from the fact, according to David and many people, that it was advantageous to us as a tribe. And so we formed rules which stopped us killing each other, and then we survived and we bred.
David's absolutely right. We all need a creation myth. That's the fact that we want that, the fact that we need it, is itself a tremendously suggestive thing. You might want to ask yourself, more cogently than you have, why that should be the case. The search for origins suggests that there might be an origin beyond ourselves. In relation to the quest for morality, one of the strangest and for biologists most puzzling of all things about the natural world is the kindness of strangers. The fact of altruism, which is everywhere in the world. Now, there are lots of attempts by biologists to explain this curious fact away. So kin selection, for example, the notion that if I'm sufficiently closely related to you, I will die in order to save you, in order to allow to carry on in the gene pool.
Might be in our interest.
That amount of shared
that might
DNA.
be in our interest.
Of course, it's perfectly true that once you've got altruism and cooperation seeded into a community, it confers a massive selective advantage. The question which you need to address yourself to is, how did natural selection allow that seed to be planted in the first place? Natural selection is very effective in going around stamping on the seeds of altruism before they jump up.
It's not a seed in the first place. It's a gradual growth of usefulness. So there's no seed planted, but you suddenly discover, you make a mistake, what you think is perhaps a mistake, and it turns out to enhance your survival. And that gets welded into the ethological system.
Peter, I'm sure that you know how dismal the existing biological explanations for altruism are.
Doesn't mean to say that they're wrong.
It implies, in the case of reciprocal altruism, for example, the notion that I scratch my back because you'll scratch me back, a tremendously sophisticated calculation of benefit and detriment.
Let me bring Diana in here, because you're an evolutionary biologist, and this is just your area.
This is my area. So there's a great deal of evidence about kin selection, about reciprocal altruism, but we evolved in very small-scale societies in which every interaction was face-to-face. And certainly, if you look at biblical texts, if you look at even other religions, it's perfectly fine to kill out-group members, but it's not okay to kill in-group members. And if you look at how people act towards one another in one-off interactions, people aren't very nice. There's a lot of reinforcement in society and punishment for people who aren't nice to each other. The society and the rules of society have been built around our evolved psychology, which enables altruism to be possible. For instance, in the military, brothers in arms. That is a way of leveraging kin selection to make people altruistic. And the whole idea that you were saying before, that biology, the fact that we all have an origin story, means that there must be something true about it. Well, I think this chair is solid, but now physics has shown that there's a tremendous amount of space between atoms. The smartest species on this planet are all social group species, and what happens is you have to get smart in order to be able to infer the mental states of other animals. Now, if you take that and try to explain the world that way, you will think that there's a universal consciousness that governs the world. So what we're doing is we're using our mind, which is like a hammer, to see the world like a nail. Our mind is good at inferring consciousness, therefore we're inferring consciousness in the world.
In a minute, Charles.
You've given a very compelling account of how once the notion of altruism exists in a society or in a community of any sort, it can generate and proliferate. What you fail to give is an account of how it was seeded in the first place. And that's what I'm on about.
Everyone drifts into doing something, and sometimes that something turns out to enhance survival. Everything in biology is a mistake.
How do we discover a cup of tea? How do we imagine that the first cup of tea as we now know it came to exist? It came to exist by a whole series of really absurd accidents. There's nothing obvious about the tea plant that says, take this, infuse it with water, add some milk to it, and if you like, a little bit of sugar from completely different...
But hang on, let's just concentrate on this idea, Pete. Consciousness, for example. The late, great Christopher Hitchens, great atheistic thinker, he said, I remember I saw him on YouTube saying it, that there's only something like half a chromosome difference between us and the chimps. Yeah. But that half chromosome is just a fantastically significant, amazing difference.
Yeah.
Chimps also don't, chimps can go to war with one another, but within their own in-group, it's very rare that they kill each other. They kill monkeys.
No, but they don't have our levels of consciousness and
art and
morality.
Yeah, they don't have their levels of consciousness, but you could say, why don't they all kill each other? They must have been endowed with God, with an altruistic motivation. Ants will sacrifice themselves for the greater good of the colony. They must have been endowed with by God with an altruistic motivation. People didn't understand how eusocial insects work until very recently, and just because we don't understand how altruism might have been seeded in our human species doesn't mean that it has been endowed by anyone else.
But they don't talk about things...
That is a great example of a God of the gaps argument.
They don't talk...
altruism argument.
Peter Atkins, they don't talk about things that they can't see. That's the point. They don't sit here, we're having a good go at it, but chimps couldn't do it any better than us, certainly, right now, this morning. Our consciousness is extraordinary, isn't it?
Yeah, but that's because it's grown with time. And I think what you have to do is to look also, the same question comes into the question of the origins of morals. And I think to understand the ethical system, you can either say God sort of set an example, or you can say, look back over our evolutionary history to see what infrastructure has emerged, but then couple that with our big brains and our ability to reflect under certain circumstances on the consequences of our actions. So there's nothing mysterious about it. It's really the emergence of understanding that we're talking about.
Adam Deen, Muslim philosopher.
I think appealing to evolution to answer this question, if God exists, is a red herring, because it commits the genetic fallacy, which is to invalidate a view looking at, analysing how it originates. It will not enlighten us whether God exists or not. And one could even argue that atheism can be explained for psychological reasons. We can say that they have father issues, and they see God as the father figure, and they want to deny God's existence.
Would be true of some atheists.
Yes, but it wouldn't enlighten us if God exists or not.
What's the greatest piece of evidence that you can bring to the table today?
Well, for me personally, I think the origin of the universe. I think
the Big Bang.
The Big Bang. I think if we probe the observable universe, we will find transcendent signposts. Science will never be able to explain.
The universe.
Science will never be able to explain how something can come from nothing.
Why not?
Because
you see, that's the
science only works in a physical realm. It can only explain to you how one physical process can happen to another physical process governed by natural law.
But you can never explain how God came into existence.
The Big Bang, if I may finish, is the literal origin of all space and time. Now, suppose whilst we're speaking now you hear a loud bang.
You're wrong.
And sorry, if I can just finish. You hear a loud bang, and then we ask the question, what caused that bang? And Peter says it happened by itself. No one is going to accept that. That would be an unintelligible response.
But why not?
The same reason applies to the Big Bang. If there is a cause for the little bang, there's a cause for the Big Bang.
You see, this is a typical anthropomorphic argument. What you're doing is you're saying, look, we understand in this universe that A causes B, B causes C. And so you trace it back, and you trace it back to a time, if you can use that expression, before the laws of science actually existed. It is improper to extrapolate your experience of causality in this universe to before when the universe existed. It's so naive.
So then how can...
Evidence for God. On our front rows, we have some extremely distinguished scientists, Bible scholars, writers, men of the cloth, people whose experiences have changed their own minds about God, and they'll be cheered on and challenged by a very lively Warrington audience. Well, at CERN, they're closer to confirming the existence of the Higgs boson, the missing particle that would confirm the Big Bang theory of how the universe came into being. Last month, the Kepler space mission discovered a planet in another galaxy far away where life, but not as we know it, could conceivably exist. It's a rather different story to the one in Genesis. Is there any evidence? From the Pyramid in Warrington, I'm Nicky Campbell. Now, this is the Christian season of Epiphany, which is all about God revealing himself to us just as the Christ child was revealed to the three wise men. But as the frontiers of science advance faster and faster, less and less is regarded as the work of God. So this morning we are asking just one very big question. Is there any for God? Dr. Andrew Pinsent, eminent physicist, as we can see, man of the cloth as well. Now, you accept the cosmology, you see the beauty in the cosmology, you accept evolution, how we came to be, and you believe in God.
Yes, indeed. And in fact, it's interesting you mentioned the Big Bang theory. The two of the most important theories.
Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to the Big Questions.